Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we unpack the confusing world of finance. And today we're diving into a new credit agreement that's like a big financial update for Albertsons companies. Get ready because we're about to see how they're setting themselves up for the future. And spoiler alert, it involves a lot of numbers and a lot of borrowing. So what's the big deal with this Albertsons filing? Well, they've just signed a massive new deal for how they're going to borrow money going forward. Think of it like getting a new credit card, but for a huge corporation. This filing tells us all about it, and it's pretty important for understanding their financial health and future plans. Alright, let's get straight to the heart of the matter. Albertsons Companies, or as they tell us here, Albertsons Companies Inc. has entered into a brand new credit agreement. This isn't just a small tweak, it's a complete overhaul of their previous borrowing setup. They call it the fifth amended and restated August 27, 2025, so it's super fresh. Essentially, they're updating how they can borrow money, and this is usually a pretty big deal for a company's operations. Now, what exactly is this new agreement about? It sets up something called a Senior Secured Revolving Credit Facility, worth a whopping $4 billion. To break that down, it's a big pool of money that they can borrow and then pay back over time, kind of like a credit line, and it's secured, meaning they put up assets as collateral to guarantee they'll pay it back. This $4 billion facility includes a $1.5 billion subfacility for letters of credit, which are basically guarantees for payments, and another $250 million. Whereas for swing line loans, which are short-term loans, the amount they can actually borrow at any time depends on something called a borrowing base, which is calculated based on certain assets they have, like receivables and inventory. So when does this new deal mature or expire? Mark your calendars for August 27, 2030. That's when this entire credit facility is set to be fully paid off or refinanced. That gives them a good chunk of time, about 5 years, to manage their borrowing under these new terms. This long maturity is generally a positive sign, suggesting they foresee needing access to these funds for a considerable period. Now, let's talk about the cost of this money. The interest, it gets a little technical here, but bear with me. Albertsons has a choice in how they pay interest. They can either go with a base rate or something called term SOFR, which is a benchmark interest rate. The interest rate they pay depends on how much of their credit line they are using. If they have plenty of availability, the interest rate is lower. If they're using a lot of their credit line and have less than 25% of 0.50% to SOFR, which is a benchmark interest rate, the interest rate they pay depends on how much of their credit line they are using. If they have plenty of availability, the interest rate is lower. If they're using a lot of their credit line and have less than 25% to 0.50% plus a benchmark. For also benchmark, they also vary percent plus a benchmark. They also mention a penalty rate of an additional 2.0% if they miss payments. This tiered interest rate structure is pretty standard. It incentivizes the company to manage its cash flow and keep its borrowing levels in check to avoid higher interest costs. Beyond just the interest, there are also fees involved. This agreement talks about customary closing fees, arrangement fees, administration fees, commitment fees, and letter of credit fees. One that stands out is a commitment fee of 0.25% per year on the unused portion of the credit facility. This means even if they don't borrow all the money available, they still pay a small fee for having that credit line ready to go. These fees are essentially the cost of having financial flexibility. Now let's look at how they determine how much they can actually borrow, the borrowing base. This is determined by various percentages of their assets. It's 90% of eligible credit card receivables, 90% of eligible pharmacy receivables, and then it gets more complex with inventory. For eligible inventory, which is not perishable, they can borrow up to 90% of its value, or even 92.5% during specific months like February, March, and April. Perishable inventory, which is not perishable, they can borrow up to 90% of its value, or even 92.5% during specific months. Like February, March, and April, perishable, they can borrow up to 90% of its value, or even 92.5% during specific months, like February, March, and April. Perishable inventory also has a limit, and there's a cap on how much of the borrowing base can come from pharmacy scripts and inventory combined, limited to $1 billion or 25% of the base. This detailed calculation of the borrowing base is crucial. It shows that their ability to get loans is directly tied to the value. On the guarantee front, the filing states that subject to certain exceptions, all amounts outstanding under this new credit agreement are guaranteed by Albertsons' existing and future wholly owned domestic subsidiaries that are not themselves borrowers. This means other parts of the Albertsons family are stepping in to back this debt. If the main company can't pay, these subsidiaries are on the hook to help cover it. This is a common practice to strengthen the security for lenders. And what about security for these loans? The filing makes it clear that the obligations under the agreement are secured by a first priority security interest in and lien on substantially all assets of the company, other borrowers and guarantors. This means if things go really bad and Albertsons can't repay these debts, the lenders have the first claim on pretty much everything the company owns. It's pretty serious collateral. Now, every big loan agreement comes with rules, what they call covenants. This agreement has both affirmative and negative covenants. Affirmative covenants mean they must do things like maintaining their business lines. Negative covenants mean they cannot do certain things without permission, such as disposing of assets, taking on too much additional debt, prepaying other debts, making certain restricted payments like dividends, creating new liens on assets, or engaging in mergers. These covenants are in place to protect the lenders and ensure the company operates in a way that makes repayment likely. They're like the fine print that dictates how the company can behave financially and strategically. There are also specific financial covenants. The key one here is the fixed charge coverage ratio. If the company's excess availability, that's the unused part of their credit line, drops below certain thresholds, or if there's an event of default, they'll need to maintain a fixed charge coverage ratio of 1.0 as the bare minimum. Indicating very little room for error. In simple terms, this means their earnings must be at least equal to their fixed financial obligations, like interest payments and principal repayments. If they can't meet this ratio, it's a major red flag and they could be in violation of the agreement. A ratio of 1.0 is the bare minimum, indicating very little room for error of 1.0. In simple terms, this means their earnings must be at least equal to their fixed financial obligations, like interest payments and principal repayments. If they can't meet this ratio, it's a major red flag, and they could be in violation of the agreement. A ratio of 1.0 is the bare minimum, indicating very little. And what triggers a default, meaning they've broken the rules of the agreement? The report lists standard events of default, including not paying principal or interest, failing to keep covenants, making false statements, cross defaults with other debts, bankruptcy, security interests being impaired, guarantees being invalid, significant judgments against the company, certain pension issues, and even change of control events. These are all pretty typical and designed to protect the lenders in a variety of bad scenarios. Finally, looking at the exhibits, we see the actual agreement, Exhibit 10.1, and the cover page interactive data file, which is just the standardized format for filing. So bringing it all together, what does this all mean for Albertsons? This new larger credit facility with a 5-year maturity suggests they are planning for significant operations and possibly investments over that period. The ability to borrow up to $4 billion gives them substantial financial flexibility. However, the detailed borrowing base requirements, the security interests, and the covenants mean this flexibility comes with strict conditions. They need to manage their inventory and receivables effectively, and they'll be operating under the watchful eye of the lenders with specific rules they must follow. In my view, Albertsons is clearly taking a proactive approach to its financing. This new credit agreement provides them with a robust tool to manage their business, fund operations, and perhaps pursue growth or strategic initiatives over the next 5 years. The fact that it's asset-based means their borrowing power is directly tied to the tangible value of their assets, which is a sensible approach for a retail business with significant inventory and receivables. On the flip side, maintaining that borrowing base and adhering to the covenants will require diligent financial management. The fixed charge coverage ratio covenant is particularly important. If they start struggling to cover their basic financial costs, it would signal serious trouble. For now, this looks like a strategic move to ensure they have the financial capacity they need, but the devil will be in the details of how they execute it going forward. Alright, that's our breakdown of Albertsons' new credit agreement filing. What's your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps, and subscribe for more deep dives. Don't forget to check out the Discord in the description. Thanks for watching. See you next time.